"We can't afford this," Robert Martinez screamed as he stared at the hospital bill in his trembling hands. $127,000 for his 8-year-old daughter Emma's heart surgery. Money the family didn't have and never would. The factory worker from Memphis had already lost his house, sold his car, and borrowed against everything he owned, but it still wasn't enough to save his little girl's life. "Daddy, am I going to die?" Emma had asked that morning, her tiny voice weak from the heart condition that was slowly stealing her childhood. But Robert and Susan Martinez had one last desperate idea. They would take their sick daughter to see Elvis Presley, using their final $20 for concert tickets, hoping beyond hope that somehow, someway, a miracle might happen. What Elvis did when he learned about this family's impossible choice would prove that sometimes angels come disguised as rock and roll kings, and sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in hospitals at all. But to understand why this moment would transform not just one family's life, but the entire healthcare system's approach to compassion, you need to know about the choice that no parent should ever have to make. Because this story begins 6 months earlier, when a routine doctor's visit changed everything the Martinez family thought they knew about their future. It was March 8, 1976, at Riverside General Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. 8-year-old Emma Martinez had been complaining of chest pains and shortness of breath for weeks. Her parents, Robert and Susan, had initially attributed it to childhood asthma, or perhaps anxiety from starting at a new school. But when Emma collapsed during recess one Tuesday afternoon, they knew something was seriously wrong. Dr. Patricia Anderson, a pediatric cardiologist, delivered the devastating news with the kind of professional gentleness that comes from years of breaking hearts while trying to save them. "Emma has a congenital heart defect that requires immediate surgical intervention," she explained to the terrified parents. "Without surgery, her condition will continue to deteriorate rapidly." Robert Martinez, a 35-year-old factory worker at Memphis Manufacturing, felt his world tilt off its axis. He'd been working the same job for 12 years, earning a modest but steady income that had always been enough to provide for his family. Susan worked part-time at a local grocery store to help make ends meet. They weren't wealthy, but they'd always managed to pay their bills and put food on the table. "What kind of surgery?" Susan asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she held Emma's small hand. "It's called a ventricular septal defect repair," Dr. Anderson explained. "Emma has a hole in the wall between her heart's chambers. We need to close it surgically to prevent further complications. The good news is that this surgery has a very high success rate, and Emma should be able to live a completely normal life afterward." The relief Robert felt lasted exactly as long as it took Dr. Anderson to continue speaking. "The surgery itself costs $100. That includes the operation, hospital stay, and follow-up care. I know it's a significant amount, but we can work with your insurance company to—" "Our insurance?" Robert interrupted. "We don't have insurance. The factory cut benefits last year to avoid layoff. We've been meaning to find private coverage, but—" The silence in the room was deafening. Dr. Anderson's expression shifted from professional confidence to sympathetic concern. "I see. Well, there are programs available for families in financial hardship. Let me connect you with our financial counselor." That meeting with the financial counselor, Mrs. Rebecca Thompson, was where the Martinez family's nightmare truly began. Despite Robert's steady employment and Susan's part-time income, they didn't qualify for most assistance programs. They made just enough money to be considered above the poverty line, but nowhere near enough to afford a $127,000 medical procedure. "Your options are limited," Mrs. Thompson explained with practiced sympathy. "You could apply for a medical loan, but with your current debt-to-income ratio, approval would be unlikely. You could try to negotiate a payment plan, but the hospital requires a significant down payment. Typically, 30% of $127,000 was $38,100, more money than Robert made in an entire year. Over the following weeks, the Martinez family tried everything. Robert worked double shifts whenever possible, pushing his annual income from 20 to— Susan increased her hours at the grocery store. They sold everything they could. Furniture, jewelry, anything of value. They borrowed money from relatives, took out loans against their car and house, and started a GoFundMe campaign that raised a heartbreaking— But Emma's condition was worsening. She could no longer play with her friends, had trouble climbing stairs, and often fell asleep at the dinner table from exhaustion. The little girl who had once been full of energy and laughter was becoming a shadow of herself, and her parents watched helplessly as their daughter's childhood slipped away. By September 1976, the Martinez family had managed to scrape together $31,000 through their desperate effort. It wasn't enough. The hospital needed the full amount up front, or at least the $38,100 down payment, before they would schedule Emma's surgery. "We've done everything we can," Dr. Anderson told them during what would be their final appointment. "I'm sorry, but without payment arrangements, we cannot proceed with the operation. Emma's condition is critical now. You have perhaps 6 weeks to find a solution before." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Robert and Susan both understood what before meant. That night, as they sat in their nearly empty living room, most of their furniture had been sold months ago. Susan made a suggestion that sounded crazy even to her own ears. "What if we take Emma to see Elvis?" she said quietly, watching her daughter sleep fitfully on the couch. "What if we tell him about our situation?" Robert looked at his wife as if she'd lost her mind. "Susan, Elvis Presley is a singer, not a doctor. What could he possibly do?" "I don't know," Susan replied, tears streaming down her face. "But Robert, we've tried everything else. We've exhausted every option. The bank won't loan us more money. The insurance companies won't help. The government programs won't cover us. We're watching our daughter die, and nobody cares." Susan had read an article in the local newspaper about Elvis's upcoming concert at the Memphis Music Hall. The tickets were $10 each, money they couldn't really afford to spend, but somehow less impossible than $127,000. "Maybe if we could get close enough to talk to him," Susan continued. "Maybe if we could tell him about Emma, show him how sick she is. I know it sounds ridiculous, but what if he could help? What if he knows someone, or has connections?" Robert wanted to dismiss his wife's idea as desperate fantasy, but the truth was they were past the point of rational solutions. Traditional channels had failed them completely. Their daughter was dying, and conventional help had abandoned them. "Even if we could get tickets," Robert said slowly, "even if we could somehow get close enough to Elvis to tell him our story, why would he care? He's a millionaire celebrity. What's our family's problems to him?" "'Cause," Susan said, her voice growing stronger with conviction, "everything I've ever read about Elvis suggests he's different. He grew up poor. He understands what it's like to struggle. And maybe, just maybe, he'll see Emma and understand that some things are more important than money." The decision to attend the Elvis concert was born of desperation, not hope. Robert used their last $20, money that should have gone toward groceries, to buy 2 tickets to Elvis's show on October 5th. They would take Emma with them, hoping against hope that somehow, some way, they could get the attention of the most famous entertainer in the world. The night of the concert, Emma was so weak that Robert had to carry her from their rusted car to the venue entrance. The little girl weighed barely 50 pounds, and her lips had taken on a bluish tint that made both parents' hearts ache with fear and desperation. "Are we really going to see Elvis, Daddy?" Emma asked weakly, as they took their seats in the nosebleed section of the Memphis Music Hall. "Yes, sweetheart," Robert replied, forcing a smile. "We're going to see Elvis." What he didn't tell his daughter was that this might be their last night together as a family. What he didn't tell her was that the doctors had given her less than a month to live without surgery. What he didn't tell her was that her parents had spent their last $20 on this desperate, impossible hope. Elvis took the stage at 8 p.m. sharp, and for the first hour the Martinez family forgot about their troubles. Emma's face lit up with the first genuine smile her parents had seen in weeks, as she watched the king of rock and roll perform. She clapped weakly during Hound Dog and swayed gently to Love Me Tender, and for those precious moments, she was just a little girl enjoying her first concert. But Elvis, with his performer's instincts honed by decades of reading audiences, noticed something was wrong. There was a family in the upper section where a little girl seemed to be struggling, where parents looked desperate, where joy was mixed with something that looked like grief. During a brief break between songs, Elvis did something he rarely did. He stopped the show. "Hold on there, folks," Elvis said into his microphone, his voice carrying clearly through the arena. "I see a little girl up there who looks like she might need some help. Are you all right, sweetheart? The arena fell silent as 8,000 people turned to look in the direction Elvis was pointing. Robert felt his heart stop as he realized Elvis was talking to Emma. "It's okay, baby," Susan whispered to her daughter. "The nice man is talking to you." Emma, despite her weakness, managed to call out in her small voice, "I'm sick, Mr. Elvis. My heart doesn't work right." The honesty of childhood cut through the arena like a knife. Elvis set down his guitar and walked to the edge of the stage, trying to get a better look at the family in the upper section. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Elvis called back. "Emma," the little girl replied. Emma Martinez," Elvis repeated, his voice gentle but carrying to every corner of the arena. "That's a beautiful name, Emma. I want you to come down here and sit closer to the stage. Can someone help this family get to the front?" Security immediately moved to escort the Martinez family down to the front row. As they made their way through the crowd, Robert felt a mixture of gratitude and terror. This was their chance, their one impossible shot at a miracle. But how do you explain to a celebrity that your daughter is dying and you need $127,000 to save her life? When they reached the front row, Elvis knelt down at the edge of the stage to be closer to Emma's level. The little girl looked up at the king of rock and roll with wonder, despite her exhaustion. "Emma, you said your heart doesn't work right," Elvis asked gently. "The doctors say I need an operation," Emma explained in her innocent way. "But mommy and daddy cry a lot because we don't have enough money." The simplicity of her explanation hit Elvis like a physical blow. This wasn't a complex medical or financial situation to Emma. It was just a little girl who needed help, and parents who were watching their child die because they couldn't afford to save her. Elvis looked up at Robert and Susan, seeing the desperation and exhaustion in their face. "How much does the operation cost?" he asked quietly. Robert's voice cracked as he answered, $127,000, sir. We've tried everything. We've sold everything we own, borrowed against our house, worked extra jobs, but we just can't. The arena was completely silent now. 8,000 people held their breath as they witnessed this moment of raw human vulnerability playing out before them. Elvis felt something shift inside his chest. He'd grown up poor, remembered what it felt like to watch his mother worry about money, understood the helplessness of loving someone you couldn't afford to help. But he also understood something else. He had the power to change this family's story. "Emma," Elvis said, his voice thick with emotion, "I want you to know something. Your operation is going to happen. Your mommy and daddy don't need to worry about money anymore." Robert started to protest, to explain that they weren't asking for charity, that they just wanted advice or connections, but Elvis held up his hand. "This isn't charity," Elvis said firmly. "This is what people do for each other. This is what community means. Emma needs help, and I'm in a position to provide that help. It's not charity. It's responsibility." Elvis gestured to his manager, who was watching from the side of the stage with obvious shock. "Joe, I need you to get Dr. Anderson from Riverside General on the phone tomorrow morning. Tell her that Emma Martinez's surgery is approved and paid for in full. Whatever she needs, the operation, recovery, follow-up care, everything." The arena erupted in applause, but Elvis wasn't done. "And I want to do something else," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "I want to start a foundation for families like the Martinez family, good people who work hard but can't afford to save their children's lives when medical emergencies happen. No child should die because their parents can't afford healthcare." Elvis dedicated the rest of his performance to Emma, but more than that, he used the platform to talk about community responsibility, about taking care of each other, and about the understanding that health shouldn't be a luxury available only to the wealthy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said during his closing remarks, "tonight we learned something important. We learned that sometimes the most important thing we can do is help someone who needs it. We learned that community isn't just about the people we know, it's about the people who need us." After the show, Elvis spent an hour with the Martinez family backstage, sharing stories about his own childhood struggles and making sure they understood that Emma's care would be completely covered. He also gave them his personal phone number, insisting they call if they needed anything at all. 3 days later, Emma underwent her heart surgery at Riverside General Hospital. The operation was a complete success. Dr. Anderson later said that Elvis had not only saved Emma's life but had done so just in time. Waiting even another week might have been too late. But Elvis's generosity didn't stop with paying for Emma's surgery. True to his word, he established the Elvis Presley Medical Emergency Fund, which provided assistance to families facing catastrophic medical bills. The foundation, funded by Elvis's personal contributions and donations from fans around the world, helped thousands of families over the year. The story of Elvis and the Martinez family spread quickly through Memphis and beyond, not as a publicity stunt, but as a powerful example of how wealth and fame could be used to address real human suffering. Medical institutions began developing their own assistance programs, inspired by Elvis's example. Dr. Anderson became a vocal advocate for healthcare reform, often citing the Martinez case as an example of how the healthcare system failed ordinary families. Robert and Susan Martinez were hard-working people who did everything right, she would say in speeches and interviews. They shouldn't have had to choose between their daughter's life and financial ruin. Emma's recovery was remarkable. Within 6 months, she was running and playing like any normal 8-year-old. The little girl who had once been too weak to climb stairs was now healthy, energetic, and full of life. But more than that, she grew up understanding that her life had been saved not just by medical skill, but by human compassion. Robert returned to his factory job, but with a new perspective on life and community. He became involved in union efforts to restore healthcare benefits for workers and volunteered with the Elvis Presley Medical Emergency Fund, helping other families navigate the complex world of medical finance. Susan started working as a patient advocate at Riverside General Hospital, using her experience to help other families facing similar crises. No family should have to go through what we went through, she would tell people. No parent should have to watch their child die because they can't afford to save them. The incident profoundly changed Elvis as well. Joe Esposito, his manager, noticed that Elvis became much more involved in charitable work after meeting the Martinez family. That night changed Elvis, Joe later recalled. He realized that his success gave him not just opportunities but responsibility. Elvis began incorporating more direct charitable work into his routine, quietly paying medical bills for other families in crisis, and using his platform to advocate for healthcare reform. He often said that meeting Emma Martinez reminded him why he had been given his talents in the first place. The Elvis Presley Medical Emergency Fund grew into one of the most effective medical assistance organizations in the country. By the time of Elvis's death in 1977, the fund had helped over 10,000 families facing medical financial crises. The organization continued operating long after Elvis's death, eventually merging with other healthcare advocacy groups to form what is now the National Medical Emergency Assistance Foundation. Emma Martinez grew up to become a pediatric nurse, dedicating her life to caring for children with the same heart condition she had overcome. She often told her young patients and their families the story of how Elvis Presley had saved her life, not just with money, but with the understanding that caring for each other is what makes us human. Elvis taught my family that help can come from the most unexpected places, Emma would say. But more importantly, he taught us that when you're in a position to help someone, you do it. You don't think about whether they deserve it or whether they'll pay you back. You just help. Because that's what good people do. Years later, Emma established her own scholarship fund for nursing students who wanted to work in pediatric cardiology. She called it the Angels in Rhinestones Scholarship, honoring the man who had shown her that sometimes the most unlikely heroes can provide the most powerful miracle. The story of the Martinez family and Elvis became a case study in medical schools and social work programs, used to illustrate the social determinants of health and the importance of community support systems. It demonstrated how medical care isn't just about clinical skill, it's about ensuring that life-saving treatment is accessible to everyone who needs it. Healthcare policy advocates began using the Martinez case to argue for universal healthcare coverage, pointing out that no family should face the choice between financial ruin and their child's life. The case became a rallying point for healthcare reform efforts throughout the late 1970s and beyond. Medical institutions across the country began establishing their own emergency assistance funds, inspired by Elvis's example. The concept of celebrity-funded medical assistance became more common, with other entertainers and athletes following Elvis's lead and using their wealth to address healthcare access issues. The psychological impact of the incident extended beyond the Martinez family to the thousands of people who witnessed it or heard about it. Studies showed that community members who learned about Elvis's intervention reported increased willingness to help neighbors in crisis and greater support for charitable healthcare initiatives. Robert Martinez eventually became a spokesperson for working-class healthcare advocacy, sharing his family's story at union meetings and policy conferences. His testimony about the impossible choice between his daughter's life and financial stability helped influence legislation requiring hospitals to provide more transparent information about financial assistance programs. Susan's work as a patient advocate led to systemic changes in how Riverside General Hospital communicated with families facing financial crises. The Martinez Protocol required social workers to be involved from the beginning of treatment for any family showing signs of financial distress, ensuring that assistance options were explored before families reached the point of desperation. The incident also influenced how concert venues and entertainment companies approached audience interaction. Many performers began incorporating more direct community engagement into their shows, following Elvis's example of using their platform to address real human need rather than just providing entertainment. Music therapy programs began citing the Martinez case as an example of how entertainment and healing could intersect. The emotional impact of Elvis's intervention, both the financial assistance and the public validation of the family's struggle, demonstrated the power of public figures to provide psychological as well as practical support. International healthcare advocates also studied the case as an example of how celebrity influence could be leveraged to address systemic healthcare problems. The Elvis model of direct intervention combined with foundation building became a template used by healthcare advocates in other countries facing similar access issues. The story found its way into academic research as well. Sociologists studying wealth inequality and healthcare access often reference the Martinez incident as an example of how individual acts of generosity, while meaningful, highlighted the need for systemic solutions to healthcare financing problems. Business schools incorporated the case into their curricula as an example of corporate social responsibility and the ethical use of wealth and influence. Students analyzed Elvis's decision-making process and the long-term impact of his intervention as a model for how successful individuals could address social problems. 20 years after that night in Memphis, Emma Martinez returned to the Memphis Music Hall with her own daughter to attend an Elvis tribute concert. As the tribute artist sang "Love Me Tender," Emma told her daughter the story of how Elvis Presley had saved her life with kindness, generosity, and the understanding that caring for each other is what makes life meaningful. That night, Emma said, "I learned that miracles aren't always big, dramatic things. Sometimes they're just people choosing to help when they don't have to, choosing compassion over indifference, choosing to use whatever power they have to make someone else's life better." Today, more than 45 years after that October night in 1976, the story continues to inspire healthcare advocates, charitable organizations, and individuals facing their own impossible choices. It reminds us that while systemic change is necessary, individual acts of compassion can still change lives, restore hope, and demonstrate the best of human nature. The Martinez family's experience serves as a powerful reminder that behind every medical bill, every insurance denial, every financial crisis, there are real people facing real consequences. It shows us that healthcare isn't just a business or a policy issue. It's a fundamental question of how we care for each other as a community. Emma Martinez, now a grandmother herself, continues to share her story at medical conferences and charity events. She always ends her presentations with the same message Elvis taught her family that night: when someone needs help and you're in a position to provide it, you help. Not because you have to, but because that's what good people do. Have you ever been in a situation where unexpected kindness changed everything? Share your story in the comments below, because just like the Martinez family discovered that night in Memphis, sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in hospitals, it's found in the generosity of strangers who choose to care. The ripple effects of that October night continued to spread far beyond Memphis. Within months, the story had reached national media attention as a powerful example of how individual compassion could address systemic problems. Television news programs began featuring the Martinez miracle, interviewing healthcare experts about the broader implications. Michael Roberts, a health economist at Vanderbilt, explained, "What Elvis did was extraordinary, but it highlights a fundamental problem. No family should depend on celebrity generosity to save their child's life." The story influenced congressional hearings on healthcare access, with Robert Martinez testifying before a House subcommittee. "I'm not asking for handouts," Robert told the committee. "I'm here because no parent should choose between their child's life and financial ruin." The Elvis Presley Medical Emergency Fund became a model for other charitable healthcare initiatives. Within 2 years, similar programs were established by other entertainers and business leaders. The Elvis model became a template for celebrity philanthropy. Medical schools incorporated the Martinez case into their curricula, teaching students about social determinants of health. Harvard developed an entire course module around the case, titled Beyond Clinical Care: The Social Context of Medicine. Insurance companies responded with more comprehensive assistance programs for catastrophic medical bills. Corporate America took notice too. General Motors and Ford developed emergency medical funds, citing the Martinez case as motivation. Religious communities established Good Samaritan funds to help members facing medical crises. Pastor James Williams organized one of the first programs. "Elvis showed us practical faith in action. He didn't just pray, he acted." The entertainment industry changed as well. Dolly Parton and Bruce Springsteen began dedicating resources to healthcare access, following Elvis's example. "That night showed us we have responsibility beyond performing," Springsteen's. Academic researchers studied the incident as an example of individual generosity influencing social policy. Medical institutions nationwide implemented earlier financial intervention protocols to prevent families from reaching crisis point. Mental health professionals studied the psychological impact of medical financial stress. Legal advocates began specializing in medical debt issues, helping families negotiate with hospitals and insurance companies. 25 years later, Emma Martinez returned to Memphis Music Hall with her own family. As a pediatric nurse, she had helped countless families navigate similar crises. She established the Martinez Family Medical Assistance Fund, helping over 500 families by its 10th anniversary. Robert continued volunteering with healthcare advocacy organizations, speaking at union meetings about healthcare benefits. Susan became Director of Patient Financial Services at Riverside General, making the hospital a national model for debt prevention. Current healthcare policy debates often reference the Martinez case as an example of both individual generosity's power and the need for systemic solutions. The story demonstrates that healthcare isn't just business, it's how we care for each other as a community. Emma, now a grandmother, continues sharing her story at medical conferences. She ends presentations with Elvis's lesson: "When someone needs help and you can provide it, you help. Not because you have to, but because that's what good people do." The legacy lives on in every medical assistance program inspired by Elvis's example, in every family receiving help with impossible bills, and in every person choosing compassion over indifference when confronted with another's needs.